Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic Friday round table show at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. We've had already a good discussion, but unfortunately it wasn't about WordPress. It's been about cats, dentistry, and just the world in general. But that's not unusual for this show, really. But we're going to go back onto topic, our beloved WordPress. And I've got a great panel. They've been putting up with my dental woe stories quite well. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going to let Kim introduce herself before she dies. She's not well, folks. So, Kim, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Kim Shivler. You can find me at kimshivler.com. And yes, I will probably be out most of today playing in the Facebook group because I'm coming off of a cold and I still have a really bad cough. Yeah. So find me at kimshivler.com or on Twitter at kimshivler. Thanks.
It's been a way of disaster, really. Hurricanes, your cats attacking you, your colds.
I know.
You know, you could write a novel, couldn't you, really, Kim, for the past couple of months? A cat's actually decided to attack a pre-show, folks.
Maybe a soap opera. Not sure a novel, but maybe a soap opera.
Yes. On to the...
God, you know, the WordPress soap opera. Can you just see it?
God.
It would be riveting.
On to our next great panelist. Sally, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name is Sally Getch. I am the WP Fangirl. And I've actually been posting on my blog at WPFangirl.com quite a bit lately, so you can go over there and read it. And I'm the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California. Our next meeting is on the third Sunday of this month, and it's about the WordPress REST API.
Great. And Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Adam Fout. I'm the content writer over at Blue Steel Solutions. Our website is bluesteelsolutions.com. Our Twitter handle is BlueSteelTX, and there's an extra E in that steel.
Yeah, that's the thing with that.
It's like Remington steel. That's all.
Yeah, it's so confusing. Trust me. You'll mess it up at least once. And my website is, my personal website's adamfout.com. And I'll actually be speaking at DFW WordCamp on content marketing here in a couple weeks.
Oh, that's great. Great. And Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Chris Badgett. I'm obsessed with online courses and membership sites. I have a plugin called Lifter LMS for creating, selling, and protecting courses. And I'm super stoked to be here today. And
Chris has decided, for amazing reasons, to be a regular member of our WordPress panel, and he's most welcome.
I think that's called masochism.
Yeah, I just couldn't kind of pronounce it. So, so on to the news stories. On to our news stories, and I'm going to start with who came on the show on Wednesday, actually, for a interview which I greatly enjoyed, and that's Scott Bolinger. And he did a great story on Post Status, and the title is "The WordPress Product Market is Completely Different Now." And he put some good points. Does anybody want to start off the conversation about this particular piece?
Well, I noticed this when it came out, partly because I'd read a couple of other articles, on the same kind of a topic. And it's interesting because in some areas it does seem like, there's somebody who's really dominant, and he talks about, WooCommerce and the, in e-commerce that, to the point where, iTheme sold off its competing product and now has a, statistics for WooCommerce plugin out. And yet in some areas, it does seem like, you think it ought to be saturated by now, and it's not. I mean, how many different commercial form plugins have we seen that all seem to be doing all right? I don't know if any of them is going to have total dominance, but there are lots and lots of users of all of these different options. So, yeah, I think what you see always is that, an industry starts to mature, and you see a smaller number of players in it. And, we saw this with computer hardware. We saw, we you see it with every new technology. I don't think we're going to end up in a place where, we have like, two options, right? It's like, okay, yeah, well, you have Microsoft and you have, and I don't think we're going to get there with WordPress, but I also think that, it's not going to be easy unless you are creating something really new that nobody else has done yet, but that you can see an established need for. You're going to have more trouble.
I thought that was really fantastically put, actually, Sally. I think it's a very confused scenario. I do agree with Scott premise that it's probably getting harder for a very generalistic product. Is there a word, generalistic? I'm not sure about that, actually. Oh, well, never mind. It never stopped me making a word, did it? But I think you probably, if you're a small player, you'd be better off to nicheify. Another word I'm probably making. I'm doing well, aren't I? And,
you're highly creative this morning.
I am. It's all the drugs I've been taking going to the dentist. God almighty, they pumped me up yesterday. Chris, what do you think about this?
I think it's a very polarizing article, and there is some good points in it. I do think the reality is a little more nuanced. So in counterpoint to the article recently, WP Forms came into a very saturated market and really started to build a lot of momentum on its own. Even in our story, we came into the WordPress LMS space when there was already another established company.
A couple of them.
Yeah, learned to.
Because I remember we did a meetup about them like right before Lifter came out. Yeah. And that's it's probably time to do it again and talk a little bit about Lifter, especially since I just built a store with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean we started about 3 years ago, so it's not in today's world, but I think it might be harder than it once was. But if you have a vision for a project or a business outcome that you can solve with technology, you can still do it. There just may be more competition, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it drives innovation. But in terms of like being a first mover advantage in the early days kind of thing, that advantage is clearly wearing off. But there's still always opportunity for new markets and new things to come online. But some of the major dominant, needs for websites are pretty established. But even in a saturated market like page builders, I don't know how old various page builders are, but they're constantly changing and who's in the lead and that kind of thing. So, you can still innovate through that. It's just going to be more challenging, but I think you can also do that as a solopreneur or with a small team. You don't necessarily have to have a 20 person company to have a fighting chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some parts, before I go on to Adam, there were some parts that I agreed with. Like, I think you put it perfectly there, didn't you? I also think that there were really strong technical barriers. There was, making a good plugin now, there's a lot more information out there, advice. On the business side, there's a lot more advice. So the technical business barriers are slightly less, but I think the marketing barriers, there's so much stuff out there, and it's probably linked to our main discussion topic. I don't know if I'm just waffling. What do you think, Adam?
You're probably waffling.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam.
Just assume that as a baseline. No, I think that especially in an ecosystem like WordPress, it's going to be impossible for someone to become completely dominant. Even if Automatic comes out and says this is the plugin for us, there'll still be plenty of competition. And like you said, as long as someone can come up with a niche use for a plugin, they're going to get people they're going to be just people who randomly find a plugin that does what they're looking for and have no idea that the bigger plugins exist while they're searching through and will just never use the big one and have no idea for years. And then they'll have built a website. Oh, I didn't know. So I really don't think there's a way for someone to become a true monopoly.
I think that's also a great point. The panel's doing really well so far, much better than me. Because, there's plugins that come up on my radar, and they're really good. I've never even heard of them. And I thought, I'm not listening to podcasts all the time, but I'm more in the WordPress community than the average consumer, probably. But I come across stuff that I never even heard of, and if it's totally feature rich. It's obviously the company. It's a commercial plugin, and I never even heard of it. So there we go. All right, I think we go on to the next story because I'm waffling, and I so which is not surprising to the panel or to you, the listener, isn't it? So on to the next one. Using testing Gutenberg, whatever it's called, from Yoast, from the team from Yoast. Anybody want to start with that?
I'm always in favor of user testing, and because there's been some stuff posted on Yoast already about alternative visions for Gutenberg, and how can we? They did an interesting post about how they could sort of envision integrating Yoast into the Gutenberg editor, because of course meta boxes are a big issue, and Yoast is a very popular plugin that uses meta boxes. So I think it's great that they wrote this article, and that they came up with, they said, here are the problems we encountered, and here are some solutions that we might suggest, and they put all those on GitHub where they're supposed to be, so the team knows about them. And it's it's really, really detailed, and I think it provides a nice example of what it's a good idea to do. And I think certainly if you are a plugin developer, you do need to be testing Gutenberg and thinking about, well, how are you going to integrate into this? And, is there something you encounter where you can think of a way that, something that the Gutenberg team might be able to modify to make your life easier?
Oh, that was much too sensible, Sally. I thought it was fantastic, but it's for this show, it's just too much sensible. We've got Lee Jackson joining us. He's a little bit late, but
I didn't recognize you in all that face fur.
No, it's like a hamster now. It's just growing every week, isn't it?
I actually charge for people to touch it now.
You need to put your mic up,
Yeah,
Lee. You're a bit
quiet,
low
Lee.
on your sound. It will come back with a remark. What did you think of the article, Chris?
I didn't get into Yost's article, but
What?
I do appreciate the value of user testing, and it makes me realize we need to get into it more with Lifter and see how that's going to play out in relation to our plugin. But I think it's also great that some of the really well-established companies with big teams like Yoast can kind of lead the charge in user testing. I think there's so much like complaining and fear in the market that to really roll up your sleeves and get in and offer constructive criticism. I'm just happy to see it happening.
Yeah, obviously our regular Morton, our regular panelists would have said there should have been some unit testing a little bit earlier, but never mind. I can see that was fantastic. And what did Adam think about this?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like
you don't care, do you, Adam? Do you really?
I think WordPress has been one giant user test from the beginning.
Yeah, true.
I think it's great. Obviously, we need more. I think I was glad that Yoast did it. It's good to see the community come out and say, and not just passively accept something like this and say, we're going to test it out and see if we can influence it. So, and they had a lot of great suggestions, and they generally do. So I feel confident that, just like with our current editor, it'll be goofy in some respects and useful in others. And people will get used to it and have fun complaining about it.
Well, I think they forget, I think the purpose of WordPress.org is to test things before they go on WordPress.com, aren't they, really? And people tend to forget that. It's
sometimes I think it happens the other way around. They launch something on WordPress.com first and then roll it out because, that's such a nice, large body of users to test things on, and they have much more access to the information than they do from all of us .org users.
It's kind of, yeah, I suppose you're right there. It's kind of, it's just a mess, really, isn't it, Sandy? it's just it's the Wild West, isn't it? That's really. What did you think about this, Lee? You look very stirred there.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, excellent, excellent. It's a new microphone. What did I think? Well, I actually wasn't planning on being on the panel today because we had other appointments. So I've literally jumped in to talk about content as soon as that happens. I've not read the articles though. So
all right, fair enough.
I am the worst person to ask right now.
Yeah, you need to play with your mic
Complete
as well.
ignorance never
it's
stops
better,
anyone
but
from sharing opinions on this show.
it's not really. It's not got the full baritone. Oh God, don't do that, Lee. Please, you just blew our ear. I'm going to mute him if he's
Just
not
lost
careful.
like 100 subscribers.
On to the next story. He's just deafened most of the audience anyway. So on to the last story before we get on to the main topic. GDPR for WordPress. Project seeks to provide a standard for plugin compliance. And I chose this story. I just want to, before the actual panel starts attacking me for choosing another crappy story, I chose this because it's been linked to some of our other discussions around security, about maybe a better system for checking over plugins. I know it's kind of linked, I felt. What did you think, Sally, about this one? So you're probably the only panelist that bothered to read these stories.
Well, I didn't read them in as much depth as I could have, but I looked at this when it came out, and then there was an article from WPMU Dev headline, something like, are you, how to be GDPR compliant. And, my first thought is, what the hell is the GDPR when it's at home? And it's basically privacy data protection regulation in the EU.
Yeah.
That, of course, nobody tells us about in America because, American news only cares about America.
Well, the rest of the world doesn't really exist, does it?
They'll fall in line eventually.
Yeah, colonialism. We inherited it from the British.
Well, you are the best place in the world to live, and the bastion of liberty and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
God help us. The thing is that if there is regulation coming out that affects us, and the thing that this takes me back to is when the canned spam law came out, right? And suddenly everybody had to change the way they were doing email lists. And this was really a big thing to launch our email service providers, all the MailChimps and Constant Contacts and so on of the world, because then they could promise that you would be compliant as long as you provided them the information they needed about your address and the opt-out and all those things. And so they're like, well, okay, if there's regulation that's going to be affecting us, not necessarily just if we live in Europe, but if we have any customers or clients there, then surprise, we should probably actually figure out what to do about this, because nobody wants to get in trouble for, not complying with these things. And yes, it might be a bit difficult for somebody in the EU to sue you across national lines, but, it's important. And, I think the issue of privacy and data protection is really an important one that we should all be paying attention to. I mean, whether or not somebody can sue you, you don't actually want to be responsible for somebody's personal information getting into hands that it shouldn't.
Oh, I thought you did a fantastic job, but it wasn't precisely. I chose this for the wrong reasons, really. I just chose it because we've had some security problems with some plugins. I just think I threw out there should be some kind of stamp of approval if you want to get it, and pay a upfront fee to get the plugin checked over more extensively, and it would go into a special part of the dispository. I can't even talk now, but that's why I did it. Does any of the other panel remark on this horrendous story that I chose.
I've got some opinions.
Go on, Lee.
Yeah. Wasn't this mainly driven by Europe? And does my voice sound better now? I had the microphone.
It just hasn't got you. You sound a bit like a semi-Dalek, actually, Lee.
Really?
A little bit. Not
Shall I just jump out and back in, and I'll be in a bit.
Yeah, that'd be great. Go on, off you go. Yeah, well, he sounded a bit rough, didn't he? He's got a new toy, but you're supposed to practice with it, Lee. So I think I'm going to kill this story because Adam and Chris just look totally bored with it. So
more security is always better. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, all right. That's it. That's the right. I'll go.
I mean, the standards idea, if that catches on in a wider way, that's not a bad thing. And more consistency in general in the way plugins handle things would also be a good thing. I know that on the theme side, there's the theme check plugin and the guidelines, fairly detailed guidelines for stuff you have to include and how to structure stuff. And I think the more people follow those, the fewer conflicts you have, the less trouble it is for users to have to try to figure out what is going wrong with my website.
Well, I'm emboldened with my remarks, Sally, because Scott agreed. Well, he actually said, if you listen to my interview on Wednesday, he actually said some of the things that I've been saying. So I'm emboldened, Sally. I'm just emboldened with my remarks. I'm going to continue with them because if Scott...
So you're saying that this is going to be a new service that WP-Tonic offers?
No, I haven't got... I've got a couple of employees of myself and I haven't got the bandwidth for what I'm doing now, so I don't do anything else. But no, I just feel, it would be great if there was a service where if you're a theme or a plugin producer and there was a written standards and you would have to pay a bit more money and it would be checked over by a specific team and you would get a certificate or something you could put on your website or saying that you passed this. And I just think it'd be a win-win for everybody, but there we go. But I'm emboldened because Scott agreed with that as well, so I'm chuffed. So we're going to go for our break, folks, and we're coming back in a few moments and we're going to be talking about the main topic of this roundtable. How do you write great content for your WordPress website? And hopefully the panel are going to have words of wisdom and Lee's going to come back with a better voice and it'll be great. We'll see you in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. I thought, apart from the last story, which I apologise about, but there we go. I thought we've had a great discussion. On to the main topic. Who wants to start out with this? How do you write great content for your Word website? And I've been reading this book by Carly Gray, The Story Engine. I've been digging into that a little bit. Can't tell you if I like it or not so far because I'm about a fifth through it. Got it yesterday.
Right. Well, I think the first thing to establish is there any difference between writing great content for your WordPress website and writing great content for any other website?
I did ask Carly to come on the show, but then I forgot. I got into a bit of a spat with the founder of WP Curve about 18 months ago. We had a Twitter exchange that wasn't very pleasant. So he probably never will come on the show. So there we go. Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I think it's in answer to what the question Sally posed is, I think the only real difference is how you make those content solutions happen. In WordPress, you're going to do it one way. In another, system, you're going to do it another way.
Can you go on any more?
That's really about it.
Oh, that's a short show. Shall we wrap it up then?
No, we can say lots and lots about writing great web copy. But I just thought that it was important to kind of put that out there. Is it different for WordPress than for Joomla or Drupal or one of these new flat file systems?
Of course not, but it is a WordPress show. Well,
yes.
apart from when we're discussing
right.
cats.
And I think that this is basically the difference you're likely to encounter is not so much writing it as posting it. What does your editor interface look like, and what fields are you putting things in? And of course we know that's changing, but we've talked about that part of it a lot. So in terms of content writing, because that is what your website has been built for, is your content.
What I want to expand, and in this book it does cover it, is that I think there's a lot more to this. Just writing the odd good article, writing really great content is great. But I think if there's some game plan or some outcome that you want to get from writing that content, there has to be structure, some idea, some plan of action. Would you agree with that, Chris? And can you give some of that, what you should be planning and that, and what some of the things that you've learned in promoting your own business?
Absolutely. I think the most important first step is to know the audience. And there's different ways to know the audience. One thing I do a lot of, which surprises some people, is I spend about 4 hours a week on the phone with prospective customers and existing customers, just to hear, help them when I can, qualify them if they're a good fit for our product. If not, refer them somewhere else. And I'm accessible, but I get just as much out of those calls as, the people who are asking questions, because I'm getting insight into my customer, my prospect's mind. So talking to them either virtually or in person at conferences that's the total ninja hack. It's to, get out from behind the computer and have a human-to-human conversation. You can also just start. I like conversations around customer avatars and figuring out what your ideal client or prospect or customer is like. But in my experience, it's more likely there's several different avatars. And so I create a ton of content in written form, podcasts, videos, and I may be talking to someone who's in the health and fitness area. I'm going to create a completely different piece of content, but I'm only focusing on that type of person. Whereas I may be creating some content for a business or marketing person, and they're wanting to teach on those topics. It's a completely different type of content. And then when you understand who those people are in general, it's also really important to understand what problems they have. So what are they struggling with, and what are their goals? What are they trying to move towards? And I can talk about those things very specifically about my audience. And I encourage people, if you can't do that, you haven't done the legwork, you haven't done the research. Content, for me, I never have a single problem coming up with an idea. I have an unlimited amount of content that I could create. So for me, it's more about prioritizing, well, what would create the most impact, or who is there the most of that I can help? And that's my issue. It's not what article, or I don't know what I'm going to do in the next podcast episode, because I'm so tuned into those problems and goals that people have. It's literally an unlimited bucket that I can draw from. So go ahead.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Chris, but you're running a business. You're there to be of service, but you're also there to make money as well, to feed your family and pay your pension and all the other things. I get the impression from you, Chris, and from your other founder, that you're not here. You just want to do really great stuff and have a great company and be your own bosses. The same reasons why I like running my own business. So that's the impression I get from you, and that's great. But there's only so much bandwidth. So is there any strategy around, any discussion about what areas that you are going to push through your content? Or is it like what you seem to be indicating? You go with the feedback that you get from the audience, really?
I'm listening to the audience, and I'm also probably one of the things I do the most of in terms of how to choose what kind of content is I'm looking for patterns. So if I get the same question a lot, or I just observe people struggling with a particular thing, or see a gap in the market that's totally unfilled, that people are talking about the problem related to that gap, it's just that pattern recognition is really key. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It just has to take awareness and a little bit of time to do that. And if somebody's in the early stages of creating content and you want to like kind of flex these muscles we're talking about, one of my favorite exercises, if you have a WordPress agency or any kind of business online, to get into the content flow and looking at problems and looking for patterns, is to think about your FAQs. These are just questions and answers. And I got this advice, I can't remember where I first heard it, but when I was creating an FAQ for my first WordPress agency, the advice I got was take the 10 questions that you get asked the most and put those in the FAQ, and then do the Q&A, and then do the Q&A for 10 more that people aren't asking but should be. And that creates 20 pieces of content. You can create videos out of that. You can create blog posts out of that. And that's how you can start to tap into, unlimited content supply, by being aware of the problems you solve.
I've got this for Adam. Thanks for that, though, Chris. That was
that's a terrific tip about what questions are people not asking that they should.
Oh, thanks, Adam. I've read HubSpot. I've read some articles recently saying that content marketing. There was a specific article written about HubSpot, and looked, because it's a publicly limited company, so it looked at the cost of requiring new clients through their content marketing strategy, and it was pointing that the cost had become burdensome. It was just too expensive. But reading this book, and I've been really delving into building up a strategy for 2018. When you're working with a client who's got online business or wants to build up existing online business that's really serious about getting a result from content marketing, what's your initial pitch to them, and the things you try and point out to them about what it's going to take to have a realistic content strategy?
Well, I do point out that it's going to be, if you're going to have someone else writing for you, it's going to be expensive, and it's probably not going to be as good as if you wrote it yourself and had someone come in and edit that content or help you with that content. You are the subject matter expert. The reason people are coming to you in the first place is because you're better at something than someone else. And that's really, you provide a lot of value from that standpoint. But it's going to take time, and very few online business owners really do have, or any business owners for that matter, have that kind of time. They're busy running a business or doing whatever it is that keeps money in the bank. And I make it very clear, it's going to take time. We can do this for you. We will do our best to provide, the best quality content. But frankly, it works a lot better if we do it instead of, having us just write it. If you write it, or at least let me do an interview with you, and then we can write something based on that. But I also make it clear that this is not like AdWords, where I can drop a bunch of money in and see an immediate rise in traffic. This is something that's a long-term strategy. It has to be paired with some sort of SEO strategy as well, some sort of optimization strategy to really work well. Unless you're just producing, at this point, extraordinary pieces of content, and you're just brilliant, you're not going to randomly show up. That's very hard to do. You have to know who your audience is and why you're targeting them. And, that's critical for the content to work in the first place, like Chris said. But beyond that, it's going to take a lot of time researching the search situation to make sure that your content isn't, and the social situation, to make sure that your content is going to have an impact at the right place at the right time, and that you're not, writing something that someone has had cornered on search for, years, that you're just, wasting your time trying to write an article about, but from the other side of it, if you do have a niche audience and that, what you can produce is going to be, even though you might not blow it away on search, the other ways that you're contacting your audience through various methods of distribution, that content will still be valuable to you and your business. You can write it, just being realistic about that. But it takes a lot of time up front, and I try to make that really clear, that no matter who's doing this, this is a something that you have to build up from basically nothing, and that it can take months, years to really get some traction. But when you get that traction, it can be extremely valuable.
Thanks for that. I thought that was fantastic. But sorry about that, folks. It's going back to the, say, unfortunately, it's a shame I haven't had time to read the whole book, but I only got it yesterday, and but I've been studying.
And you've been at the dentist.
Exactly. And but I have been studying the subject quite extensively. And does it help to have writing style guides? Especially if you're going to have guest writers, Adam. Can you, if you can provide a lot of detail about the article you're looking for, and you have a writing style guide, does that help, Adam?
Absolutely. Can
you tell the audience what a writing style guide, the basics is, Adam?
It's like one of our most popular posts. As a style guide is just something that makes it clear to the writer from the beginning, the voice of the article, what words are allowed, what words aren't allowed, and they can be really broad, but it's the point of a style guide is to make sure that everyone is writing in such a way that it supports the brand and doesn't go off brand. So because you can get articles, and the larger your company gets, if you're getting, guest blog posts and stuff like that, this becomes a problem very quickly, that you'll get someone who is a great writer and has written an excellent article for you, but it doesn't fit with the goals of the business and the goals and what your audience is looking for. And we've had plenty of excellent articles submitted to us where I say, this is great, but not for us. This is not going to fit for us. You're going to have to take this to someone else. And so it's good for, when your website gets to a certain point, you start getting solicited by guest bloggers, and that can be helpful to have that for them, and to maintain those relationships while maintaining the brand. One thing that I was thinking while Chris was talking about audience was not just the importance of your audience, but thinking about which you mentioned, Jonathan, your business goals, and making sure, and that the style guide helps to support that. Are these things that we're writing? How do we make sure our writers are not just writing stuff that's great and that's going to fall into the content plan, but that the audience is looking for, and that supports our business goals and helps us to get to where we want to go. So the style guide is really important from that. And, it can be basically whatever you want. There's no real standards, but you can find tons of resources for it online.
So Sandy, you said you've been doing a lot more blogging lately, but do you do any kind of looking at the landscape of other people's content and a little bit of SEO research before you choose a subject to blog on?
Almost everything I write about comes out of actual experiences with clients, or maybe sometimes out of the meetup. So it does kind of go back to what Chris said about, talking to the people who are your customers and finding out what the issue is with them. I'm much less strategic about my own website than I would like to be, but I can definitely speak from experience about some of the things that Adam has been sharing. Even before I got into WordPress, or really at about the same time, I was doing some ghost blogging for a company that also hired me to do some other contract work, kind of more directly related to what they were talking about. And it's like, the thing that people need to know about content marketing is it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. And the thing that people need to know about hiring people to write for them is that it doesn't necessarily mean less work for you. It means you don't have to write, but you're going to have to take the time to, educate the person who's writing for you in things like, this is what matters to our business. These are our goals. This is what we do. This is kind of the underlying essence that needs to go behind anything that you're writing. And then, everything Adam was saying about the voice and tone and general style. And so that, even if a person is not trying to write in your specific individual voice, that they need to be writing in your kind of company's voice, which is the point of a style guide of any kind. I mean, there's sort of the editorial style guide that says, here's the way we handle using or not using serial commas, or, all of those kinds of things. But there is definitely the style part of the style guide about, what fits for us. So you have to do a lot of prep work and maybe a lot of revision if you're hiring somebody else to write, and to bear that in mind. And it can be really a difficult thing to do for a small business. It's not like, this, we can just write stuff and it doesn't necessarily cost us money to do it. And so that's going to be a really, easy way to do advertising. It's not easy. It's very hard to keep up with stuff. I used to teach WordPress, and I would tell people the hard part of your website is creating content consistently. It is not this technical stuff.
Well, I just want to make it clear to the folks. There's I'll just quickly see if Adam agrees after make this, and then I'll go on to a question specifically for Chris. Is that local SEO, when it comes to content production, is a very much more different animal than an online business that has a larger regional or national audience. The requirements, I'm not saying that it's easy local, because I just think it's a really totally different beast in some ways. What do you think about that, Adam?
I agree completely. I mean, there's a huge difference between...
Adam, you can come on the show anytime you like, Adam.
Yeah, no, it is a completely different animal. And, local is going to be... You can have some impact... fairly quickly, on the local level, whereas, a lot of that just has to do with making the right contacts even, and some simple distribution with local, power players. So no, I agree with what you said for sure.
Chris, so, what has been the biggest return you feel for the brand, and basically getting people to utilize your product when it has come to content production? What have been some of the biggest winners that you've had?
So when I talk to people who use Lifter LMS or want to use Lifter LMS, and I ask the question, how did you hear about us? It's going to be one of two answers most of the time, which is, I saw you on a YouTube video, or I heard you on a podcast. So I think we have over 300 videos on our YouTube channel. So video content is a big deal for us. I've been doing a lot with live lately, not some, but I plan on doing a lot more with live video and live streaming content. And then the podcast, from a SEO perspective, I have a podcast called LMS Cast, and all those interviews and episodes, were around 170 episodes, I think now. They are all transcribed, which I talk with somebody for about 45 minutes about a topic relevant to course creators and membership site builders. And there's so much great content in there. I'm not necessarily the expert on everything. I'm, representing my audience, picking the brains of these experts. All that gets transcribed. So that niche question that someone types into Google about some obscure part of building a membership site or an online course, they're going to find one of those podcast episodes, and they enter the top of the marketing funnel, if you will. So the biggest return for us in terms of content has been video and podcasting, with the, focus on text for the, SEO value and the transcription.
How do you, because obviously the podcasts are fantastic, do listen to. Chris does a fantastic job. He also got an English guy on a few episodes ago, and I'm not sure I can recommend that because that guy waffled on a bit. But Chris was really good to him. But one thing I noticed about your podcast, obviously it's branded, but you deal with general marketing. You have a very broad selection of guests, a bit like myself. How have you had trouble persuading Google to see those articles and the way that you want Google to see it?
I haven't done a really professional SEO overhaul. I'm just doing general best practices.
Right.
So I'm just going after long tail keyword phrases that people just naturally use in conversation, and also as they type into search engines. So I don't have a really scientific approach to that in terms of watching Google. I just actually did yesterday a podcast episode with an SEO expert about this exact topic. So we talk about this for about an hour. That episode will be out in about 3 weeks. A guy named John Darty.
Yeah.
But I operate just generally in business because it's very chaotic, startup, things are always changing, markets are shifting, all this stuff. I tend to operate more with what I call simple rules and strategies than like really detailed protocols. So just my simple rule is I'm making content every week. I'm syndicating that content to multiple places. It goes on the website, goes through social media, goes into Facebook group. I do it live if I can. And I'm focused like a laser on the needs of my audience and my customer, which is why I can bring in a broad array of guests, but we're going to be talking about stuff that's relevant to course creators. So even though the expertise is broad, how we focus that energy is very specific and targeted. And those are my simple rules.
So are you hinting that I might go off topic, actually, Chris? I'm only playing, Chris. I'm only playing, Chris.
Yeah.
Adam, so let's say you had a client that is, let's take e-commerce. They've got a niche products in a specific area of e-commerce, and they want to get more traffic to their e-commerce website, and they want to convert those into paying, and they've been using paid AdWords, Facebook adverts, but they want to invest more money and time. I know this is a very broad question, but hopefully you could go with it because you understand why I'm doing it. Can you give any insight about the amount of content they're probably going to have to produce every month and every 6 months? You got any kind of guy? I know it's a difficult question I just put to you, but hopefully you can see why I'm asking it.
Sure. I mean, it is a difficult question. We get that a lot. How much should we produce? And one thing I do want to, just to back up a little bit to answer that question, I think that it's important to talk about ongoing content versus static content. When you're writing content for a website, and especially in the example you posed, an e-commerce website, those product descriptions are going to be really important. The different pages on the website are going to be really important. Having those optimized is going to be important just to get that traffic up over time. And from another standpoint, if you're doing a lot of AdWords stuff, you have to make sure that whatever your AdWords are pointing to is matching up. If your ads are using certain keywords, and then you're going in there, clicking into a product, and that product has nothing to do or very little to do with what that ad said, that ad's not really going to perform for you. So making sure that static content is in place, the product descriptions, the about page, the home page, all that stuff, that's critical too. That forms a really solid base, because you can produce all the content you want, but if the static content is garbage, you're going to have difficulty with conversions. You're going to have high bounce rates, because you have to, you don't want someone to come to your blog and find this excellent blog article and then say, oh, let me learn more about them, and then find, one sentence on the about page or something like that, So, but in terms of how much you should be producing, I don't know. It's all over the place. I like to set minimums. I would say, try if you can to get at least one piece of something out a week. I think that, we have some clients where they want to do something every other month, and it's just one piece of content. And content can, that can vary. It could be a podcast with a transcription. It could be a video. It could be an ebook or even, some simple PDF, but some piece of content that you can use to fuel social media, to fuel email marketing, stuff like that. A week, I think is great. But I mean, there are places that produce 2 or 3 articles a day, and there are places that, and to me, that we could never do that, and then there are places that they're only putting out something every 2 weeks, but it's so good, and it's so extensive and it's so well researched that, it's amazing they can get it out in 2 weeks. So I think you really have to temper that with what your audience expects, what your goals are. And, but you have to make sure that static content is there as the baseline in the first place and supports all of that.
Here.
I've
encountered situations where the product descriptions hardly said anything about the product. And they were sort of charming and all that, but they didn't actually include like descriptive words about what this product is. Or somebody who paid for a print ad, people came to the site from the ad pointed to the home page. There was no obvious link to the purchase page from the home page. So they just never got there to buy it. So make sure that you don't that you don't overlook the obvious.
I also think distribution is important. It's an area that I recently listened to an interview of Noam Kagan on the art of paid traffic, and I also got good news, listeners. Noah's agreed to come on WP-Tonic in the new year as a guest, which I'm very happy about. But Noah, I've always admired Noah's directive. But get back to the topic. Basically, he was saying is you've got to look, if you're a startup, if you're a company that hasn't got an enormous budget, you've got to look at new playgrounds to push your content on. It's probably going to get too expensive. Facebook, Google AdWords. You've got to look at sponsoring podcasts or sponsoring events, online events, webinar events, or physical events. And you got to maybe look at paid LinkedIn adverts. You've got to look at different playgrounds. What do the panel think about that?
I think that's completely true. And, if you know who your ideal customer is, then, you can find out something about where they hang out, what their interests are. And this is part of why it can be useful to advertise on a podcast. I remember a podcaster back in the olden days, 10 years ago when podcasting, everybody thought you were going to get rich from podcasting. There were some success stories with ads because somebody had a really niche podcast about wine, basically. And they had wineries advertising on their podcast. And the average value of somebody responding to their ad was about $1,000. So the fact that it wasn't a large group of listeners was not a problem. And if you can find some kind of place like that to market yourself, you're going to get a lot of return for it, and you may not have to have a huge outlay. And you're not going to get lost in the same way that you might just with the Google AdWords or an ad on something very general. So the niche for your own business, you need to kind of find out, okay, well, so these are my ideal customers, kind of back to that, whether it's because you interview them personally or you've created personas, where else are they that I can find them?
Funny enough, before I go to Adam, we seem to have lost Chris slightly, audience. Maybe he just got too bored and he had enough of it. But what was interesting on those interview on the Art of Paid Traffic was that he was talking about his own podcast, which he's been spending a fair bit of time on, and he actually questioned the amount of hours that he was having to put into it because he's obsessive about looking at the analytical data that supports every activity of what he does and what his companies do. So he was questioning the amount of time for the amount of audience that he was building up, which I found interesting as well. The other thing I wanted to discuss is, so Adam, is there a hybrid to this? Can you actually get people to write content for you and then you edit it and you add your own stuff? Is that also a good way to go down?
Oh, for a client?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all depends on the client and what their needs are. What are their needs when it comes to content, and how much can they provide? Some people, and what are they comfortable with? Some people are not comfortable writing at all. They don't like it. They never liked it. They hate it. They can talk for hours, but they don't want to write anything. They're just not good at it, and they don't enjoy it. And so, from my side of the street, the best I can do to support their goals is to listen to them, get it all out verbally, and then I can, turn that into some sort of article. For other people, they're very, they have a tight grip on their content and they want to write it. It's very important that their voice is in there and that they write it to them. And they just need someone who can come in and clean it up a bit and, make sure that it's going to work on their website. So I think you can absolutely provide a wide range of solutions for content. It really depends on, when you go to build a website, most people don't care one way or the other, but for whatever reason, it's like, just make it, but for whatever reason, when it comes to writing, everybody has something that they're comfortable with. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone feels it should be done a particular way. And even the ones who don't seem to care, they really do care because it represents them. It represents their brand. And most of these are, ghostwritten articles that are going to go out with their name on it. They want to make sure that it is representing them properly, which is smart.
Oh, thanks for that. I've got one final proposition to put to the panel. Unfortunately, we lost Chris must have had a technical problem. Another thing that's occurred to me, and I like both Sally and Adam's view on this, is that I think content marketing has changed quite dramatically. Well, it probably was always there anyway, so I'll backtrack on that initial statement. But what I'm trying to get to is that I think educational content, providing insight, training, is increasingly will become a key business tool to make your products and services different to the competition. And increasingly a strategy about producing content around training, tips, tricks, all the things around a product and a service that makes you different to the competition will increasingly become more important. What does the panel think about that?
I think it's absolutely true. And, if you are in a position to do that, it's going to work very well for you. I remember there was an electrician who had all these YouTube videos about electricity, and they were very funny. I mean, a lot of them had to do with like what things are dangerous and what you have to watch out for, and they were sort of short, kind of both how-tos and warnings. And in a lot of ways, there is no better way to convince somebody to hire you than to tell them how to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make it very clear that it's very difficult. And in this guy's case, dangerous. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, electricity is not for amateurs.
No.
But this was, a real distinction because, you can look in the phone book or on Yelp or whatever and have no idea, for things like that. Mm-hmm. And even though it's a local market, in any local market, there are going to be a lot of electricians, a lot of plumbers, a lot of, and so finding something to make you stand out, if you can do it, which is often tough for people in those businesses because there's only a couple of them and they're out doing jobs all the time. It really is going to be a differentiator for you.
Absolutely.
I think in the local market, what you just said as well, but I also think I noticed on my other business, there's a couple of players that have really linked software with actual, they make more money by people joining a training membership linked with the software, and the markup, is enormous, but they're not only providing the software, they're providing all the marketing insights on how you utilize that software to actually get the end result, which is more orders, more clients, more money, basically. What do you think of that, Adam?
Well, I think that, it's great. And I think that from the educational side especially, people, that forms a relationship. People appreciate being helped and being taught something. And, educational content does just that. And it helps to form the relationship. And, I think just generally speaking, as human beings, we have a certain sense of a person who taught us something. There's a certain, there's a trust that's built up, So I think from that standpoint, producing the educational content is really important. But, I think that the problem is there's a lot of content out there at this point that's really crap, and it's garbage, and it's not very helpful. It doesn't really answer a question, and a lot of the ways that people are finding you are through questions. They're posing some sort of question into Google, and they're trying to find an answer. And if you can help that with them, not only have you started to build this relationship, but you've also a lot of the times, like you said, made it clear that this is really difficult. This might be something you need me to help with. But even going beyond that, if it makes it so that it gives your business sort of an end game. You don't want to be doing this forever. Nobody wants to be doing this forever. Most people would love to get to the point where they're teaching someone else how to do it and establishing yourself and that authority in yourself as, I'm not just someone who does this. Yes, I do this and it makes money, but hopefully long term I can get to a point where I'm teaching others how to do it. I'm being helpful, which makes me feel good, but I'm not having to grind myself down year after year doing the work when I've gotten so good at it that I can show others how to do it and help them to get to the same success that I've got. So I think educational content and that kind of idea, all that value being built into it, it's expensive, but it's being done because most of us worked very hard to get this expertise that we have. And there's some money needs to be paid for that if you want to, skip all the hard work we did.
That's great. I think we wrap it up now. It's been a wild podcast, some slight technical troubles, people coming in, disappearing, but that goes with the territory, folks, of a live podcast, really. I'm going to ask those that are standing, that have lasted, to tell you how you can find more about them. And I'm going to start with Sally. How can people find out more about you, Sally?
You can find me at WPFangirl.com. And if you can spell my name, you can find me everywhere else because I am unique in Google.
Certainly are. And Adam, how can people find out about you and what you're up to and more about you in general?
Sure. Adam Fout, last name F-O-U-T, and mostly unique, although there's some guy in Ohio that has my last name and does a lot of trucking videos, so I guess you can follow him. My website is adamfout.com, bluesteelsolutions.com. Extra E on the steel is where most of my content is found, and at BlueSteelTX.
Oh, thanks for that, Adam. And if you want to get hold of me, folks, which I hope you will do, because if you've got any comments, suggestions about guests, topics you would like us to discuss, that would be fantastic. Best to get me on Twitter. at Jonathan Denwood. Email us Jonathan at WP-Tonic.com, or post on the Facebook page or the YouTube channel. They're the main 4 areas that any suggestions and comments are most welcome. And if you're really generous, we've had some people do this lately, which is great, is leave I've just lost my track, folks. I'm sorry. Leave
review
a review
on iTunes.
Review on iTunes. Thank you, Sally. Leave a review on iTunes, and that really helps the show. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this conversation this week. I have. I think it's been fantastic. And we'll see you next Friday at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time in the morning next week. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.